The president today threatened to take action against General Motors following the announcement the company is slashing jobs next year. GM says the moves are needed to position itself for a future that includes electric and driverless vehicles.
General Motors just made a move that no one saw coming: 14,000 job cuts and the closure of 5 U.S. plants. The company, once the pride of American manufacturing, just slapped President Trump's America First agenda right in the face. How will the most powerful man in the country respond when a giant like GM defies him?
The presidential tweet sounded very much like a threat. The U.S. saved General Motors, and this is the thanks we get, wrote a very disappointed Mr. Trump. We're now looking at cutting all GM subsidies, including for electric cars.
For decades, General Motors has been a cornerstone of the American automotive industry, shaping not just the market, but the entire landscape of manufacturing in the U.S. The company was founded in 1908 by William C. Durant and quickly became one of the largest car manufacturers in the world. Throughout the 20th century, GM defined the American car culture, creating iconic vehicles that were emblematic of the American dream. From the Chevrolet Impala to the Cadillac Eldorado, GM's cars were symbols of power, luxury, and innovation.
We're going to take a closer look at the situation, which some in Korea are warning could be just the start of a trend of big American companies moving back to the United States to stay on the Trump administration's good side.
The company played a significant role in shaping the U.S. economy, especially in the post-World War II boom. As GM expanded its factories across the U.S., it provided jobs to millions of Americans and became one of the largest employers in the world. In the mid-20th century, GM's assembly lines were seen as the epitome of industrial might. They were responsible for the mass production of vehicles, driving the American auto industry forward and setting the standard for manufacturing globally. It wasn't just about producing cars. GM was also about creating a culture of innovation and progress, with advanced manufacturing processes that became benchmarks for other industries. But GM's influence wasn't limited to just manufacturing. The company became a significant player in global markets, making its cars accessible to people worldwide. By the late 20th century, GM had factories not just in the US, but across Europe, South America, and Asia, cementing its place as a multinational powerhouse. Its economic footprint extended beyond car sales, with GM also involved in financing and even defense production during times of war. The company's financial reach and market dominance made it an undeniable pillar of American manufacturing.
It was announced pink slips for 14,000 workers and the closure of 5 North American plants. What he meant by cutting all GM subsidies was not clear.
General Motors shocked the world with an announcement that turned the auto industry on its head: 14,000 job cuts and the closure of 5 plants in North America. It was a move that left many reeling. For decades, GM had been the symbol of American manufacturing, and this decision seemed to go against everything it stood for. But behind the bombshell was a calculated strategy to adapt to the future. GM was no longer content with just being a giant in the American auto market. The company had its sights set on the global stage, and it was determined to lead the way in the electric vehicle revolution.
But consumers are buying more SUVs and pickups, and Joe Weisenfelder of Cars.com said GM is focused on the bottom line.
So they are making some cuts that are unquestionably painful now.
The closure of plants and the cuts to jobs were not just about cost-cutting measures. They were part of GM's bigger shift towards global expansion and innovation. As the world moves forward with electric vehicles, GM had to decide whether to stick with traditional car production or invest heavily in the future. They chose the latter. The global demand for EVs was growing rapidly, and GM saw an opportunity to become a key player in that market. But this shift came at a high price, particularly for American workers. The decision to move operations overseas, reducing the company's footprint in the US, was seen as a betrayal by many, especially given the climate of nationalism that President Trump has championed. For GM, this wasn't just about cutting costs or realigning resources. It was about staying relevant in an increasingly globalized and environmentally conscious market. The company knew it had to pivot its focus to stay competitive, and that meant leaning heavily into the future of transportation: electric vehicles. The EV push was not just a trend, it was GM's response to the automotive industry's next big wave. But for Trump and many American workers, this shift felt like a slap in the face. GM was abandoning the American workforce in favor of global profits, and the backlash was swift and fierce.
Following the Trump administration's imposition of hefty safeguard duties on Korean products and Washington's desire to overhaul the South Korea-US Free Trade Agreement.
This clearly reflects the Trump administration's policy of bringing jobs back to America.
Within hours of GM's announcement, President Trump was furious. His reaction was swift and public, condemning GM for betraying American workers and threatening to hold the company accountable for its decision. Trump's response was not just about the company's decision to cut jobs, it was about the message GM was sending. For a president who had built his entire economic platform about bringing jobs back to the US and protecting American industries, this was an outright affront. Trump had repeatedly promised to prevent companies from outsourcing jobs and had even used tariffs as a tool to keep businesses from leaving the country. But now, one of America's most iconic companies was doing just that, and Trump was not about to let that slide. In public statements, social media rants, and interviews, Trump painted GM's decision as corporate greed at the expense of American workers. He didn't hold back, calling GM's actions a disgrace and vowing that the company would regret this move. Trump's anger wasn't just about the immediate impact of the job cuts, it was about the bigger picture. If GM, a company that had long been the pride of American manufacturing, could make this decision, what would stop companies from following suit? The stakes were high, and Trump saw this as a challenge to his entire economic vision. General Motors' decision to close 5 plants and cut 14,000 jobs wasn't a sudden move or a hasty reaction to market pressures. It was a carefully planned strategy that had been in the works for years. This wasn't just about trimming the fat. GM was positioning itself to lead in the future, especially in the electric vehicle race. They knew the auto industry was evolving, and they had to stay ahead of the curve to remain relevant. The company had already started laying the groundwork to shift operations towards global manufacturing and EV technology long before the announcement hit the news. GM's long-term vision wasn't simply about surviving, it was about thriving in a rapidly changing tech-driven world. At the heart of GM's strategy was innovation, and that meant embracing the future at the cost of some traditional practices. While President Trump's America First agenda was rooted in nationalism and protecting American jobs, GM argued that its shift towards international operations was not a betrayal of American workers, but a necessary evolution. To stay competitive in an increasingly globalized economy, GM had to make bold moves, and focus on electric vehicles and sustainable manufacturing was the key to its future success. The auto industry was changing, and GM wasn't willing to get left behind while other companies surged forward with new technologies. As much as GM's move to close factories and cut jobs was seen as a controversial and aggressive decision, it was part of a much larger and well-thought-out strategy designed to secure the company's place in the future. One of the biggest reasons GM was able to weather the storm of Trump's tariff threats was its global reach and diversified supply chains. Unlike many other American companies, GM had already established a vast network of operations around the world. Their production facilities stretched across continents, ensuring that no single country or market could completely cripple the company with tariffs or trade restrictions. This level of international diversification made GM less vulnerable to the kinds of moves that Trump was threatening. In addition to its global manufacturing base, GM had been making long-term investments in the electric vehicle market, signaling its readiness for the future of transportation. GM wasn't just watching the rise of electric vehicles, it was actively pushing the envelope, developing cutting-edge technology, and partnering with foreign governments and companies to secure rare materials necessary for EV production. This included investments in securing access to lithium, cobalt, and other materials essential for battery production. GM understood that the future of the auto industry was going to be about much more than just making cars. It was about creating sustainability, high-tech vehicles that could meet the demands of a greener, more connected world. Despite the political pressure from the Trump administration, GM's global strategy gave it a significant edge. While Trump fought for a 20th century trade war focused on bringing manufacturing jobs back to the US, GM was already positioning itself for the 21st century. The company's abilities to shift focus towards global markets and technological innovation meant that even if the US markets became hostile, GM could still thrive in Europe, Asia, and other international markets. Trump's tariffs may have been a temporary setback, but GM had already built the foundation to weather any storm and continue growing. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.